Priti Patel is going, she says, shortly to announce means by which those who come into this country across the English Channel or in the back of lorries will be flown out to offshore processing plants, destinations, and Africa apparently is top of the list. We don't know exactly which country it is going to be. Now, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? I guess, on the one hand, it would be very, very expensive, and all sorts of guesstimates that it might cost billions every year. But would it perhaps dissuade people from coming? So could there be an upside to it? Or do we run the risk that sending people to offshore processing centres will lead to all sorts of horrible stories? Well, joining me is Beth Gardner-Smith, CEO of refugee charity Safe Passage. Beth, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Now, I think your charity initially was involved really with the big movement of people that was taking place across the Mediterranean. But I guess the principles are similar across the English Channel. The numbers that are coming, as you know, are rising rapidly. They trebled last year to 28,000. No one quite knows what this year will be, but 60, 70,000 is the estimate. The Home Secretary is trying to put an end to this. How do you see the prospect of flying people off to Africa or elsewhere for offshore processing centres?
Well, the first thing I'd say is it's totally inhumane, and we'd oppose it on principle. But the second point is that, in fact, it's also totally unworkable and incredibly expensive. So our charity is part of a coalition of charities, of over 300 charities called Together with Refugees. And we've done some analysis which suggests that in total, the government's sort of proposed package of measures that they're bringing forward in their Nationality and Borders Bill, which include offshoring, would cost the taxpayer an extra £2.7 billion a year. That's a year. Now, it's worth saying also that the government hasn't produced these figures. We have had to produce these figures because the government has so far refused to do so.
Okay, the figures, Beth, the figures are speculative. The figures are speculative, but I wouldn't for one moment disagree with you that it's going to be expensive, because it is. How is it inhumane to put people on aeroplanes?
It's inhumane to send people to other countries that they have most likely no connection with whatsoever, to process their asylum claims, when we can perfectly well do that in this country and have been doing so for many years.
But how do you propose to stop this growing tide of young, undocumented males arriving on our shores?
I mean, firstly, I don't know what the problem is with males. You're a man.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. They're coming, many of them, from areas that have been through war, Syria and places like that. And the chances of us getting a percentage, it'll be small, but it doesn't matter, a percentage of people who have been perhaps seriously radicalised is much more likely in young males than it is in young females.
Well, I think you're absolutely right that the majority of people are coming from war-torn countries and they're fleeing war and persecution. That is absolutely the case. And the first thing is that we should treat those people with humanity and compassion and look at their asylum claims seriously, which is what we need to do. Now, on the point about crossing across the Channel, yes, absolutely. We don't want to see people risking their lives across the Channel. But if you look at what's happened since 2020, which is when we've seen a really significant increase in the rise of people, what have we seen from this government? We've seen a doubling down on the policies that aren't working in the Channel, and we've also seen a closing down of safe routes that were offering people an alternative to be able to come to the UK, reunite with family and join family and relatives, and claim asylum safely and humanely. So if you look at cause and effect, actually what this government has done, and actually, where you've seen the rising crossings in the last couple of years, there is a direct link with the government's closure of safe routes and their unworkable and inhumane policies in the Channel, which they're trying to put forward more of, and the rise in dangerous journeys across the Channel, which nobody wants to see.
And what would be an acceptable number of young men to come into the country every year? 100,000, 200,000, more?
I think we should be doing our bit as a country, and we're certainly not doing our bit at the moment when it comes to providing protection and asylum to refugees in a way that is humane. And what the government's proposals are firstly, incredibly costly, and secondly...
so is there any limit?
Limit in the numbers of people coming? Of course there is. Of course there is. Britain should be doing our bit.
No, you've said that, and I understand that. I'm asking you what you think doing our bit equates to in numbers.
What our bit looks like doing is providing asylum to genuine people in need of protection, fleeing persecution, who claim asylum here in the UK. And rather than speculate about figures, what we should be doing is actually looking at the figures of this government's costly proposals, which the government, by the way,
let's forget about money for a moment. Let's forget about money for a moment. To me, this is an issue of national security. Undocumented young males, ISIS themselves boasting they're trying to put their operatives into Europe. And what I'm asking you is, why can't you come clean with telling us what you think a reasonable number is?
What we can come clean on is to tell you what a reasonable approach would be, and an actually workable approach to what's going on at the moment. And if you think that Priti Patel's policies are going to change what's happening in the Channel, the government's own impact assessment suggested they were going to make things worse in the Channel and put more lives at risk. So actually, what we've done is cost their proposals, and what we're suggesting is actually a humane and workable approach that would lead to more people coming to the UK safely, instead of seeing these dangerous journeys across the Channel.
I tell you what, this issue is another one that won't go away, because there are going to be a lot of people coming this year, and there's a lot of public anger.